in the long run, not right here, but the development from a rural economy to an urban economy. And basically, you find all of this happening in Glenwood, and it's well documented in the deeds and the contracts and so on. Yeah. And you know, one of the driving factors in this whole process is transportation, because
that's
you have
right. Yeah.
the turnpike going in to Point Pleasant and Parkersburg, right down Washington Street in 1837, and right after that, the property is split up into 5 plantations for the 5 green children, and it takes off after that. You have a transition from agriculture, which was important before the Civil War, and you can see this the way the plantations were divided up. They weren't. We were expecting large rectangles going from the river into the hills, and what you get is you know, irregular lots.
And
yeah, like
right here. This is the. That's a little better.
Yeah, right. That's that.
Everybody has a like a checkerboard.
You put that there and look like
riverfront. Yeah, flat.
Right.
Yeah, flat land.
At this point in time, the river was the main transportation artery. You had to have river access.
Right.
But the other important thing is the lots were divided, so each one got 155 acres of bottomland approximately, which is your prime agricultural land.
Yep.
Now, you know, after the Civil War, Walker comes in.
1870 and starts to buy land.
With a plan to develop industry, and then divide everything into lots and sell it to workers. Now I was wondering how this, you know, coincides with the development of old towns and stuff like this. This is pre. There's some, you know, there has to be some historical motivation here.
Well, 1873 is when the C&O was complete, so that's when the New River Field started opening, and a lot of West Virginia coal started to become really in great demand.
That's sort
outside
of
the region.
I'm going to put 1873 here as a date.
But the west side didn't get a railroad until the late 1880s.
Okay.
So that was on the other side of the river, and
okay.
One of the interesting sort of subplots here is the west side developed as an independent, separate, incorporated community of Elk City until 1895 when Charleston annexed it. In those days, you could annex something by basically the city council saying, we want you, and you don't have much to say about it. But nowadays, we try to annex outlying areas, and there have to be countless public meetings, and then there's a vote taken. Most people don't want to be annexed by anybody else.
Am I allowed to speak?
Sure.
I just think it's really interesting that the Little Page Mansion is still standing too, and I think it needs to be mentioned because that building is probably in danger of being just ripped down and replaced with a new modern building. I don't know. I hope
it's not. No, it's
but
not.
I think it needs to be tied in somehow, and people made aware too that it is still standing as one of the original 5.
Yeah, you're right. It's
the Little Page Mansion is a good example of the change in settlement pattern. During the early historical period, everything was based on the river and located on the river. Now, the Little Page Mansion is built in 1844. Why is it away from the river?
Because it's on the turnpike.
Because the turnpike was built in 1837. And then you get the transition from, you know, rural economy and farming to the gentleman farmers. When you look at the other inhabitants of the west side, they all worked in Charleston. They were businessmen, lawyers, and stuff like that.
A lot of them were involved with salt industry.
Farms after 1850 because you had a bridge going across the river and a turnpike going directly to Charleston. You can commute to work. And then after that, you get the development of urbanization. And the interesting thing when you're looking at the deeds, we thought, well, you know, Glenwood is split up to sell lots. Well, if you look at the original incorporation papers, it wasn't to sell lots, it was to develop industry. It was to develop translated those. The,
What? Oh, yeah, I have them if anybody wants to see them.
Clay,
I have them with me.
coal in various industries, sawmills, to put in streetcars and streets and stuff like this. Didn't mention anything about dividing it up to lots. Once you got the industry and the infrastructure, then it was divided up into lots to be sold to workers.
Yeah.
And then another major thing is when we got the original maps, we put them on Google and we figured, well, you know, if the streets match up and everything matched up, but the lots didn't match up. In 1906, we have another map of the bottom section of Glenwood, and all of the lot sizes were double, from 25-foot frontage to 50-foot frontage.
Sorry.
That's what you have today, basically, for all of the residences in Glenwood.
But also going on around it was Walker's attempt to divide and develop the west side. And there's some really flowery stuff. I don't know if you guys put one up, but we've got his promotional pamphlet on what he called the West End Extension, which if you read that, you'd never know you were on the west side. The way he describes everything in such flowery rhetoric. Broad avenues, and there's a park which eventually was built. But if you're reading that and you're not from here, you're going to say, well, I want to buy one of those lots, man. This is a going concern. And when you got there, there wasn't much there except five farms and, you know, a dream to divide it. And then Walker ends up going broke in 1873, so his dream falls apart initially, but I think there's enough impetus and momentum by that point where those pieces of his dream are picked up later and incorporated into this larger vision for the west side. And then the railroad comes in, and that's when that industry becomes a reality.
Now, the other thing, looking at the old maps, you can reconstruct what was going on at the plantation to some extent. When you look at the 1850 railroad map, you know, you kind of assume that you have 155 acres of bottomland that would be your major row crops and stuff like that. But in the middle of that bottomland, you have a swamp. Actually, you have two. You have the reservation area that became Luna Park, which was deeply dissected, typical of what you get where you have a tributary going into a major river. But near the railroad, there was another swampy place that's shown on the railroad maps. When you look at the upper division of Glenwood, someone had penciled in large tracts of land that were identified as the middle road garden, so you know they weren't only raising cattle up there, they had a dairy farm, but they also had gardens, and there was another area that's identified in the oral histories too, and identified on the map as a cherry orchard.
And you can look at
we haven't
production.
figured out exactly how all of the street names like Garden Street, Orchard Street relate to what was going on the plantation in the 1800s.
But there are good records, and a lot of this detail is way too much. I mean, we don't need to be concerned with all this for obviously this project, but we can go back and look at census and tax records that give an account of what was grown in any particular year in Glenwood. So you know that there were 500 gallons of wine, which is why we have the Glenwood label.
To see some of your
40 gallons.
your
One of two farms in the Canal Valley that produced wine in 1860.
oh, that's probably some people might put that.
Did the wines have anything to do with the slavery? Were they tied in anyway?
Probably not with that small. I mean, they may have attended the vineyard, but not really. But the other guy,
There's two big wine jugs in the attic in Glenwood.
Still there.
Which would be interesting if we could get them dated.
and that brings up another issue with Glenwood, which we've talked about, and I know you guys have.
Yeah.
You know, one of the first things my class saw when they went to Glenwood is how cool a lot of the artifacts there are, and then we talked about having to kind of soft pedal any specific information about what is at Glenwood for fear of too many people knowing.
Right. Yeah, that's why there's really no